Hi, everyone. It's Brad Weber, host of the 2023 Informs annual meeting, and I am so excited to share the latest in our special series of What's Your Story interviews featuring the 2023 Informs annual meeting plenary speakers who will be presenting during this year's annual meeting, October 15 to 18 in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. Today, I have the privilege. I'm joined by a premier thought leader in supply chain management and business analytics, David Simchi-Levi, professor of engineering systems at MIT and head of the MIT Data Science Lab. He is the current editor-in-chief of an Inform's flagship journal, Management Science, and previously served as the editor-in-chief of the other flagship Inform's journal, Operations Research. David is also a member of the National Academy of Engineering, is an Informs Fellow and an MSOM Distinguished Fellow. David has frequently been recognized for his work and contributions and is recipient of the Informs Impact Prize and the Daniel H. Wagner Prize. David, wow, a lot of cool stuff going on. Thank you so much for being here with me today, and thank you so much for being part of the Informs community.
Thank you for inviting me, Brad. Great to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. And listen, as a force to be reckoned with, you in the supply chain management, can you share how this kind of became an area of interest for you?
So that's really a great way to start our discussion. About 30 years ago, I was an assistant professor at Columbia University, focusing on theoretical work, mostly focusing on what we call probabilistic analysis of algorithms for the vehicle, the classical vehicle routing problem. So the research was focus on developing new theory, mostly emphasizing academic publication. And then at some point, I received a call from somebody at the Board of Education in New York City. He said that New York City Board of Education, we are talking 93, is engaged in developing a decision support system for school bus routing. They need an engine that will help them create effective routes. They heard about my research. Am I interested in collaborating with the board? I started explaining, hey, I'm focusing on academic work. Most of the research is highly theoretical. There was a pause on the other side of the line. And then the person asked me, do you really want to make an impact? Do you want to be relevant? And I realized here is my opportunity to transfer academic research into practical solutions. And I started collaborating with the Board of Education in New York City, initially just developing the engine that generates effective routes. And as we develop the engine, remember, this is 93. The technology that we have today was not available. They asked, can you also integrate your algorithm with our database so that we can visualize what comes out of the engine? We said, yes, we can do that. All of a sudden, at the end of this process, we had a system that planners have been using to optimize school bus route, and it had a big impact on the efficiency and the effectiveness on the route. The city, the Board of Education, submitted the new technology that we developed to a Microsoft competition, and we won the first place in the public domain sector. All of a sudden, I realized, hey, I can develop an entire system from the engine all the way to the user interface. But how many cities of the size of New York you have? Not many. And so I started looking around, what can we do? And all of a sudden, I learned about a new area, supply chain management, that today is very hot, but at that time, nobody even knew the terminology. And I realized I can develop the same type of concept, analytics, and interface for general supply chain challenges. And I established a company in 96, 97 that focused on three technologies. One for network optimization, the second one for what we call today multi-echelon inventory decision, and the third one, production planning and scheduling. 10 years later, when we sold the company, we had, think about this is an academic, 350 clients using our technology on a day-to-day basis, and the company became part of IBM technology infrastructure. That was the way I entered the space of supply chain. I stayed with IBM for a couple of years, and then I realized I need to change direction. I started a company in 2011 focusing on business analytics. Think about this. Now everybody's talking about AI and machine learning for supply chain. We started this in 2011. And very quickly I realized you need cloud technology to complement the business analytics. So I started a company in cloud technology. Both companies became part of Accenture technology infrastructure over the last 6 or 7 years. And so you can see the focus of my research, the focus of the companies that I established, supply chain, business analytics, cloud technology. I'm company free now, but I focus on what we call at MIT, the MIT Data Science Lab, where we develop, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about the Data Science Lab and the technologies that comes out of the Data Science Lab.
It's so interesting listening to you. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's so much we took for granted as a society for so long. And everybody's thought, oh, the supply chain, which was really hit and became big during the pandemic, we don't realize how much what goes behind the scenes and what really needs to happen there. And people think, oh, this is a new thing. But no, I mean, you were totally doing this and ahead of the curve a long time ago. Is there anything about your career path that our audience might be surprised by?
Let me make 2 observations. The first one is, if you look at my career path, I really have changed directions multiple times. Remember, I started in the early 90s focusing on theory for problems like vehicle routing, location theory, and then I discovered supply chain, and so my research changed to focus in the middle of the 1990s on supply chain. Then I focused supply chains and manufacturing and flexibility, and all of a sudden I realized if I continue focusing on supply chain, I can generate papers, but my students will not be able to find academic job because supply chain was all of a sudden saturated. And so remember I mentioned 2011? 2011, I took a pause and I decided I need to rethink my research and the focus of my student. And I decided to focus on 2 strategies, on 2 research areas, because I was not sure, 2011, which one will be the appropriate one for our profession and for my students. So I decided 2011 to focus on supply chain resiliency. That's one. And the second one was on data science. Now, these both are hot area, but when we started, very little interest. And I'll complement this description of my journey with a story. Everybody today, Brad, is interested in supply chain resiliency. When we started, no interest in supply chain resiliency. I started focusing in 2011, as I mentioned, on supply chain resiliency because of events like the tsunami in Japan and the flood in Thailand. And if you remember, the volcano eruption in Iceland of 2010. And I was fortunate enough to collaborate with the Ford Motor Company, develop a new way to measure the resiliency of any supply chain, identify hidden risk, and develop mitigation strategies. We won. Think about what I'm describing. Our technology was implemented by the Ford Motor Company and received in 2015 the best engineering technology at Ford. This is coming from academia, best engineering technology at Ford. I published a few technical papers, but the most important one for the purpose of this discussion was the Harvard Business Review paper that I published in 2014, describing the concept, describing the framework, and describing the impact on the Ford Motor Company. Between the publication of this paper, 2014, and the beginning of the pandemic, I was knocking on many doors trying to convince companies to focus also, in addition to what they are doing on supply chain resiliency, very little interest. Most companies were focusing on cutting costs and improving efficiency in their supply chain. Everything changed, Brad, at the beginning of the pandemic, but not in the way you expect. Think January 2020. The pandemic was in China. It was not in North America. It was not in Europe. I started collecting data on what's happening in China, and I realized I can use the model and the concept that I developed 6 years earlier to understand the impact of what's happening in China on supply chain in North America and Europe. And I very quickly submitted and published a paper in Harvard Business Review in February of 2020, where we said supply chain in North America and Europe will stop by mid-March. This was in the title and in the first paragraph. And this is exactly what happened. March 17, Fortune magazine reported the automotive industry in Europe completely shutting down. March 18, the New York Times reporting the automotive industry in the US, in Mexico, in Canada, completely shutting down. And that started a domino effect with huge interest in our technology. 2 months later, in April, I published a follow-up Harvard Business Review article where I said companies need to apply stress tests to their supply chain to make sure they are ready for the next disruption. And what made me really excited is that, remember this paper, the second paper was published the first was February of 2020, the second April of 2020, the stress test. And then last year, in May of 2022, the US President Economic Report, think about what we are discussing. These are academics, supply chain people, operation people. The US President Economic Report had a section focusing on supply chain stress test and recommending something that came out of us, recommending to executives to apply this concept to make sure they are ready for the next disruption. Wow. So if you think about this journey, it's really unbelievable. Something that started in 2011 has made enormous impact over the last couple of years.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible to hear that path that you've been on. And you know, based on just this and when we send this out before the meeting, I think we're gonna have standing room only in your room. So I want to talk a little bit about your plenary. So for the plenary this year, can you tell us a little bit about the vision for the plenary and kind of what inspired you around your discussion?
One way to describe the vision for the plenary is to remind you that at MIT, I lead the MIT Data Science Lab. The Data Science Lab is a partnership with MIT and about 25 companies, focusing on some of the most challenging problems that they have by bringing together data models and analysis. The partnership is cross-industry. We have companies in CPG, oil and gas, retail, financial services, and we have a global footprint. The reason I mentioned the Data Science Lab is because in the plenary, I am going to describe real-world problems that these companies face, the solutions that we develop, and the theory that we publish. And let me illustrate this with a couple of examples. I already mentioned the resiliency. Remember, the enormous opportunity in resiliency came out of developing a new model to measure the resiliency of any supply chain, implemented that forward, and all of a sudden, now there are literally dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of companies using our methods, concept, and technology. Here is another example. A lot of the work in the lab is on personalized offering. If you fly today from London to Paris, when you buy your airline ticket, we are not involved, but once you purchase your airline ticket, our system kicks in and offer you ancillary product, priority boarding, car rental, hotel, and the offers that you will get, Brad, may be different than the offers that I will get because the system is learning about individual preferences. What I learned throughout this implementation in multiple companies is that as you move from one company to another, focusing on the same problem, because the business constraints are different, the reward function is different, you need to customize the algorithm for every company. Now, this is a challenge because you need to start every time from scratch. Now, this is an online environment where you are trying to learn about individual preferences. What we knew is in offline, when the data is available at the beginning, You don't need to customize anything. There are very, very powerful algorithms that allow you to generate recommendation systems that works well, independent of the reward function. This suggests a beautiful theoretical question. Is it possible to reduce the online learning that we focused on to an offline environment? Because if you can reduce the online learning to the offline environment, you can use all the tools that are available for offline to solve the online learning problem. That will be one beautiful example where a problem generated by our collaboration with industry raised a question that is highly theoretical but will have a big impact on future implementation. Here is another example. So the first example was around resiliency, supply chain. The second example was around personalized offering. The third example will be around experimental design. We partner, I think I mentioned, with companies on price optimization. One of our largest partners was Zalando. Zalando is considered the largest online fashion retailer in Europe. Our technology, what came out of the data science lab, price 1.5 million SKUs every week in 23 European countries, week after week. Now, we developed all this, we tested with offline data, we were very happy with the result. The company said, that's all good, but how do we test in a field experiment that your algorithm really works? That allow us to develop a new way to test pricing algorithm that now many are using in their business. And so a lot of the focus and the vision for this plenary is combining theoretically elegant research with practically impactful algorithm.
So that's wow, there's so much bundled in here, and I'm really excited about this plenary, and I think everything you're touching on, what do you hope when people walk out of that room? What are some of one or two key takeaways that you hope people grasp and can go and implement?
It's really a great question, and maybe to reflect on your question, I can compare what we used to do 20, 30 years ago with what we can do today. 20, 30 years ago in our community, you had people who were focusing on theory and they did not do any work that is directly related to practical implementation, or you had people who collaborated with industry and did interesting practical implementation. What I am trying to show in the plenary is that you can combine the two, that you can focus on, remember my statement, on theoretically elegant and practically relevant research. The three examples I gave you from supply chain resiliency, right? Remember, this was coming out of pure academic research, the personalized offering, the experimental design, all academic research with big impact on the bottom line. My experience is that today companies understand that the opportunities that they have is by combining science and art. Science is all the data science, the OR, the optimization models that we develop and work on. Art is the intuition, the experience, the domain knowledge that business people have. It's these combinations that allow us to make tremendous impact on bottom line. If some people will get out of this plenary the vision that enable the combination of the two, I think they can affect the entire profession for years to come.
Well, I know that you're going to be delivering a tremendous value to everyone in the audience, and I'm going to shift a little bit, and we're going to talk about life kind of outside work. And what are some things that maybe people would be surprised about of your interest when you're not doing on the professional and collegiate side?
That's a surprising question. My wife and I like outdoors, we like travel, and we like sports. So on outdoor, I love scuba diving. So multiple times a year, we go on trips to different beautiful areas. We travel all over the world. And the beauty of being an academic is that you have many colleagues and former PhD students in different locations. So this is just an opportunity to meet, to reinvent yourself, and to even collaborate. And finally, we play tennis 3 or 4 times a week to make sure that we keep our mind sharp, our energy high, and hopefully all of this will increase our creativity.
That's awesome. Do you play pickleball at all?
I don't. My wife does, but I don't.
Really?
I play tennis.
Yeah, that is great exercise, and I probably should be doing more of that.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you regarding kind of a moment in time or flashback. One of the things we always like to ask people is if you could have a conversation with your younger self, give advice to your younger self. And by younger, I mean like really when you're starting out in your career, what would that advice be?
You know, this question is a question that a lot of time receive in panel discussion in our profession. And I try to emphasize, Brad, 3 important characteristics that I did not emphasize, to be direct, when I was young, but reflecting on my experience, I will emphasize now. The first one is emphasize and focus on real world problems. Try to make sure that the problems you are working. I have a lot of PhD students. In my lab, there are 20 PhD students. Technically, they are extremely strong. They are well equipped to do amazing research. But what they lack sometimes is understanding the real world problem and connecting it with the research that they are doing. So motivate your research well with real world problem is one element. The second one is try to find the right balance between high risk and low risk projects. If all your research is high risk, it's a little bit dangerous. If all your research is low risk, people will say, hey, there is nothing here, there is earth shaking. Finding the right portfolio, like in any investment, is very important. And finally, around you, and I tell this to all my young colleagues, there are very smart people. Collaborating with people will stimulate your creativity, will help you improve the research that you are focusing on.
Excellent advice. I love all points. Every one of those has a really amazing nugget in there. You know, your career is amazing. You've done so much, and if you could pinpoint, you know, a professional high point or something that really resonates with you, what would that be?
Reflecting on this question, this is probably the phone call, Brad, that I received in 1993 from the Board of Education asking if I would like to collaborate, and I'm trying to explain, hey, I'm focusing on my academic research, I'm doing theory, I'm not sure that I'm interested. And then there was a pause for a few seconds, and the guy on the other side, there is a paper when I'm describing it, but the guy on the other side asked, Professor, do you want to make an impact? Do you want to be relevant? And until that point, I was just focusing on generating papers that address some what I thought interesting question. Now I was asking myself, okay, how can I use the analytical tools that I have and the capabilities that I develop to solve problems that matters? That changed my career completely.
That's really an incredible point you're making. You know, there are all kinds of things that people do, but what's your legacy? What's your impact? You know, and ultimately, what's your relevance? I love that, and I think that's really something important for people to take away as they look at their own journey. Last kind of fun question here: if you could live anywhere else in the world, where would that be and why?
I really don't want to live permanently in any place. I want to be able to travel and move. Remember, I told you travel is what the fashion that my wife and I have. And so we spent this summer about a month in Singapore and China. Then we spent time in Sweden. Next month, we are going to spend a few weeks in Israel. This is what I love. Just meeting different people with different culture, different education, different focus, and together with them, learning some new thing about myself and about their culture. That's what gets me very excited.
Absolutely. I mean, every time you go someplace unique and different, I mean, learning those cultures is what makes all of us whole. And we really, everyone should be doing that. So
Exactly.
Well, David, thank you so much for having the opportunity today to speak with you. I know that everyone is going to be so excited to see you in person in Phoenix. And, from the Informs community and from everyone else, just a sincere thank you for all you do for not only Informs, but for honestly the industry as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.